once upon a time, there lived a famous entertainer who, in a desire to make himself even more beloved among the masses, decided to create a special delivery system, one that would both bear his name and serve as a way for the public to learn more about him and his various exploits. This system would give the entertainer the chance to share updates of his career and homespun messages of inspiration. More importantly, it would give his fans the opportunity to send personalized messages to him, for a price, of course, though he insisted this was still a great honor for them. Some agreed, but many more eventually felt this system was perhaps not the exciting experience they had initially been led to believe. That maybe they were being fleeced of their hard-earned income for little more than glorified platitudes and the slim chance of a brief, half-hearted verbal exchange with their hero. Much of the public revolted and mocked the system, forcing the entertainer to eventually announce its shutdown. Hanging his head in shame, the entertainer retreated back to the comfort of his fame, severing this close connection to his fans, but perhaps in the process learning a lesson that fame does not equal the right to charge your admirers for so very little. And so ends the tale of the Jeremy Renner app. Okay, this probably isn't the best fairy tale you've ever heard, and admittedly it certainly wouldn't have been considered entertaining or valuable enough to end up in the collection of tales gathered by two German academics, linguists, authors, and brothers in the 1800s. For that is when Wilhelm and Jacob Grimm developed a curiosity about German folklore, a curiosity that eventually developed into a lifelong dedication to collecting folktales. The brothers believed the stories represented a pure form of both German literature and culture, and wanted to ensure the tales could live on and be passed down through the ages, with no danger of them disappearing from public consciousness, as might occur if they were allowed to continue existing only as oral tradition. The brothers would both travel the country and invite storytellers into their own homes, listening to their tales and then transcribing, and in some cases editing and revising, the stories. Over time, the brothers would collect over 200 different folktales, their dedication ultimately forming the basis for larger folklore studies. And while they might not have been the original authors of stories like Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, Snow White, Rumpelstiltskin, and Sleeping Beauty, their names still eventually became synonymous with the genre, as Grimm's fairy tales would live on for years to come, not only being used to teach generations of children valuable life lessons, but also providing source material for countless media adaptations, some of which stick close to the versions of the stories included in the brothers' collection, but many more of which have taken great liberties with their plots and characters. Which brings us back to the star of my admittedly hastily written fairy tale from earlier. 4 years before his arguably misguided misadventures with a short-lived app bearing his own name, Jeremy Renner found inspiration from one of the Brother Grimm's most beloved legendary tales for what could perhaps, at that time, be yet another potential franchise on his belt. However, just as his app would shortly turn out, this too would arguably prove to be a miscalculation. The year is 2013, and MGM and Paramount Pictures are ready to launch the next big fairy tale-inspired action franchise with Hansel and Gretel, Witch Hunters.
10, Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous missteps, mistakes, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris. And before we kick off this month's holiday theme of Failure to Franchise with Trev and Chris-tmas, I have a little spell I'd like to conjure up, if you don't mind. Is that okay, Trev?
Ooh, I get nervous whenever magic is involved, but I'll allow it. Since in the spirit of giving that we're for this theme month, I will allow you to cast your spell.
Excellent. Okay, here it goes. Dabble, dabble, toil and trouble, a director rises from Norwegian rubble. Without the A-team, Hawkeye stumbles. Bond girls no more. Famke and Gemma's O's no longer double.
I quit.
Come on, that was a good one.
No, it's good. I'll give you credit. You put some work into it. I'll give you credit for that. That was pretty
thank
clever.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But no, obviously, I'm sure everyone is very, very excited. I'm sure they could probably tell from your intro, a very eagerly awaited episode. People love a good laugh riot, and we're finally doing a Will Ferrell, Adam McKay movie this episode. So very, very exciting. Of course, their classics, Anchorman and Talladega Nights, and then Hansel and Gretel, Witch Hunters.
Completes the comedic masterpiece trilogy that they were always hoping for.
Yes. So we're looking at 2013's Hansel and Gretel, Witch Hunters. Chris, why don't you give us a little bit of info on this one?
Sure. It is written and directed by Tommy Wirkola. It's based off, obviously, the fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm, Jacob and Wilhelm. The budget of the film is $50 million. Domestically, it made $55.7 million. But, ooh. Trev, yes, exactly. That is a gunshot to the head with that one. But luckily, the world saved this movie, and it was a huge hit for Paramount. Actually, the fourth highest grossing film of 2013, behind World War Z, Star Trek Into Darkness, and G.I. Joe Retaliation. This movie made $226 million. So this was a big hit. So why are we talking about it, Trev? I have no idea why.
We'll have to get into that. I guess the reason we're talking about it is because you chose to talk about it. Do we want to talk about that a little bit here?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Trev had this really good idea that for the month of December, we should gift each other some movies that neither of us planned on talking about before, and just kind of like a surprise for each other. And we titled it Failure to Franchise with Trev and Chris-tmas. So I gifted Trev Hansel and Gretel. For the reasons of Jeremy Renner is kind of hot right now with Hawkeye, and as well, the movie is very, very short, and sometimes that is a blessing, which we will get into. But
although I think we both discovered not quite as short as we thought, considering we were just going off of the theatrical version, and I believe both of us watched the longer director's cut ultimately.
Correct.
But still a short film. And a film that neither of us had seen, and I will say, I don't want to say yet what I thought about the movie, as you and I haven't talked yet. But that's the point. Is this was a first time watch for both of us, and kind of surprising. This is the kind of movie where I'm surprised neither of us had seen this yet.
Same.
I think that was the exciting thing about doing this one, because it just seems like, how did we both miss this? Even watching it, I was like, wow, it's shocking to me that I know why I didn't see it. I guess I'm sure I can guess why you didn't see it, but still, I'm surprised neither of us stumbled into it at some point along the years.
Well, exactly, especially around the time. Like, can we talk a little bit about, maybe 2013 as kind of a moment in Hollywood, and might actually explain some of casting choices around here too, is franchises were really getting off the ground in the, would you say the early aughts? Is that what the 2010s are? What is that?
The aughts would be the double zeros, so you could just say the 2010s, I believe.
Okay, so the 2010s. Mm-hmm. And with the Marvel movies and the Avengers movie, Avengers just hit in 2012 by this point. So, of course, Jeremy Renner, Mr. Franchise.
Mr. Attempted Franchise.
Yes, Mr. Attempted Franchise. And remember when he used to shit on franchises? Remember that? Mm-hmm. Especially when the Avengers came out, and he was kind of like, he had he was under a spell for most of that movie. And then he was mad about making big budget blockbusters, and all of a sudden, he's hired to do the new Bourne movie. What else? Mission Impossible, and then tried to get this movie going. Strange.
Yeah, he's had a very interesting career, Jeremy Renner. It's kind of all over the place, and I'm sure we will talk about that. Or I guess we could just talk about it now since he's the leading man, right? Let's actually dive into Renner first, because he's the man of the hour, right? So we'll get to the whole backstory of this film, but let's talk about Jeremy Renner. Let's just, I guess, get out of the way. How do we both feel about him? Because I do see him as a kind of a divisive figure in Hollywood, or if not divisive, at least somewhat controversial. I feel like a lot of people really don't like Jeremy Renner, and I think he sets himself up to be a punchline quite a bit. You just mentioned one of the ways by kind of shit talking the whole idea of like kind of big budget blockbusters and then becoming, a featured player of the biggest one of all time.
Yeah.
His music career, which is kind of, it is what it is. Of course, the Jeremy Renner app, which was a huge fiasco. So you kind of get why he's a punching bag, he also has been in like a lot of beloved movies though, and it's just kind of strange that he seems to have the career where you'd think everyone would just unanimously love him, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So I want to ask you, Chris, and I'll talk about my thoughts on him in a moment. Where do you just fall on Jeremy Renner in general?
I do kind of have that love, not even like and sort of stand Jeremy Renner relationship.
Right?
You know,
it can't be love hate. It's more like
no, it's
tolerate. Like,
it's very lukewarm. Very lukewarm. Like when he pops up at things, I'm like, okay, like whatever. He's got a smugness to him that he brings, I think, to a lot of his roles, which is kind of annoying. But as we record this, Hawkeye has premiered, and it has had 2 episodes by this point. And I gotta say, he's pretty awesome in that show, and he's
and it's
showing
already
a side. He's showing a side to him that I've never seen before. So it's
that's what I was about to say. It's already like the best usage of him in the MCU, right? You can just tell like they've figured out a way to tap into his level of charm and charisma that maybe the films have not to this point.
Yes.
Although I know you and I are both huge Age of Ultron defenders, and I think he's actually quite good in that one. I think his scene with Scarlet Witch at the end is a great speech from him and well delivered. But yeah, he's an interesting one because I remember early on, like many people, obviously the first thing I would have seen him in is 2003's SWAT, a movie we will cover someday on here, where he was the villain in that film. Spoiler alert, because I know that's like a twist in the film. Oops, I ruined SWAT for everyone. Sorry.
No.
But yeah, so that was the first thing I saw him. And then you kind of like, unless you were watching some of the smaller films he was making, he didn't really pop in too much else. Until we get that in 2007, he's the star of 28 Weeks Later, the sequel to 28 Days Later, which I actually prefer 28 Weeks Later. That's a whole other conversation. But I really liked him in that. And then, of course, The Hurt Locker, which was his big kind of breakthrough moment. So at that point, between 28 Weeks Later and The Hurt Locker, I was like, okay, this guy, I really like this guy. I think he might be the next big star. And then, of course, in 2010, you get The Town, and he's really good in The Town.
Yeah, that movie's fucking awesome. I love
it's
The
great.
Town.
Yeah. So it really seemed like when he got cast as Clint Barton in Hawkeye, I remember being very excited because that was at that time where it was like, yes, this guy is ready to go to that next level. And you can tell that thought that I was having, like as you just said, that's what Hollywood was having too, because suddenly he's not just getting cast in the MCU. They're putting him in Mission Impossible. And we have to remember at this time, so his first Mission Impossible film is Ghost Protocol. People might forget this. I think this is like a little bit of forgotten lore to the Mission Impossible saga. But he was being put into that franchise to take it over. Because there were concerns about Tom Cruise's continued marketability after he went crazy pants for a bit in the lead up to Mission Impossible 3 and really hurt that film's box office. And so there was the thought that maybe William Brandt can be the new Ethan Hunt moving forward. And then, as you said, they put him into the Bourne franchise to take that over because Matt Damon didn't seem like he wanted to do anymore. So they said, well, what are we going to do? Well, we'll get Jeremy Renner to come in and take over. So Hollywood was all in on this guy. And that's where he started to, like, as you said, started to get a little bit more annoying, like publicly and it's slipping a little bit. And his performances becoming, that's the strange thing. I feel like at that point, too, his performances became a little lazier. I don't know. I just think you look at him in Hurt Locker and it is an incredible performance. You look at him in The Town and it's incredible. And then I don't know if it's just the films he was getting or what, but I don't know that he's ever been that dynamic again. But as you said, hopefully Hawkeye, the show, turns that around.
No, I completely agree. Dynamic is the word that he lacks. And I mean, I guess it does make sense that he is a tertiary, Avenger.
Yeah.
Like weirdly, the MCU is pretty spot on with casting. So maybe they saw it way ahead of we did, like maybe they did. I don't know, but
yeah,
lukewarm reception on Jeremy Renner. I have a friend that despises Jeremy Renner, like punchable face type of despise. It's.
Yeah, I don't personally know anyone like that, but I certainly see that that kind of pop up a lot on Twitter and just the kind of general fandom online. There seems to be a lot of people just really can't stand the guy,
which I don't understand. I don't understand that. I don't think he's enough to love and not enough to hate. He's just a working actor,
Yep. Yeah. You're never excited that he's in anything, but his presence doesn't turn me off from seeing something. I guess that's how you can sum it up.
Yeah.
Okay, that's one actor down. But let's actually, before we get into the rest of the cast, let's just talk about how this film came to be in general. Let's talk about the filmmaker, because this isn't necessarily, not that $50 million is the hugest budget in the world, but this isn't necessarily a filmmaker whose name is a household name by any means, and especially North America.
Yeah.
And not necessarily the sort of filmmaker you'd think would be handed $50 million from MGM to go make this big kind of blockbuster film. So how did this happen, Chris?
Do you remember a 2009 Norwegian film, Dead Snow?
Well, as the resident zombie movie expert here, Chris, you know I do. You know I do.
Of course. So I have a little bit of a history with that movie, Dead Snow, and I said it in another episode a while back, but I'm just going to touch on it a bit. I saw Dead Snow at a film festival here in my city, and the fucking place went wild for it, including myself. And I was like, this was the year that Zombieland came out. Mm-hmm. And I remember seeing Dead Snow and being like, wow, that was even better than Zombieland. And I was just, I'm sure you've been to film festivals in your life, and there's something about being in those crowds that elevates the film before you take a second look at it. So I remember telling my friends, "Oh man, you got to see this movie, Dead Snow. It is absolutely hilarious. It's an incredible Nazi zombie horror comedy, and we great gore, great effects, just super hilarious. Oh my god, it was a wild time." So I invited some friends over. We watched it, and my friendships with both of them almost were completely destroyed because they fucking hated it and thought I may have been on meds or something, because they couldn't believe that I had shown them this piece of shit. So it holds a weird place in my heart. I own the Blu-ray.
Well, because as you said, like, we should make clear, just your friend's opinion aside.
Yes,
I will also say I'm not the biggest Dead Snow fan either. I think we've talked before about how I think the last 15 or 20 minutes are really fun, but it's a slog to get to that 20, 15 minutes. I will say, just so I don't forget to say this later, the 2014 sequel, Dead Snow 2, Red vs. Dead, which Ricola also did, I think that one rips. Like, I love the sequel, and I think that's the movie everyone kind of sold the first one as. But that all aside, Dead Snow was a hit. Like, it was it had a lot of buzz coming out of film festivals, and in the horror community in particular, it was a very big kind of instant cult hit. So that's the kind of buzz that gets you meetings with studios, essentially. And I think I believe he approached Gary Sanchez Productions, but it's because he had this idea for a long time. Right? He talks about how when he was in film school as a younger man, he had come up with this idea of a blockbuster version of Hansel and Gretel. He was just thinking about the fairy tale. So as we know, the Hansel and Gretel is the classic fairy tale collected by the Brothers Grimm in 1812 about a brother and sister who are lost in the forest, end up in a cabin that's or a house made of like gingerbread and pastries that a witch lives in. And she wants to cook them and eat them. And they, of course, turn the tables on her and end up sending her into the oven. And that's essentially the whole story. Very, very famous fairy tale. It's really the inspiration for a lot of horror, as is many of those fairy tales. People often talk about how, on its base level, even something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that's Hansel and Gretel. And you think about that for a second, you go, oh, yeah, it is. So you can see how that just kind of basic narrative fits through. So, like many people, I think, Ricola heard the story young and kind of kept thinking about it and was wondering, I wonder what happened to that brother and sister afterwards. And in his mind, he said, well, I bet you they would come out of that with such a hatred for witches that maybe they would become witch hunters. So he had that idea, and he told that idea to someone at film school. I believe it was one of his professors. Yeah. And the professor told him, shut up. Don't tell anybody else that idea. Don't say it again until you are in front of a studio head or a studio or like a production, a large production team, because that will be greenlit. I guarantee it. And sure enough, when he then gets some, Hollywood meetings coming off of the success of Dead Snow, he brings that idea to Gary Sanchez, which is, as we mentioned, Will Ferrell and Adam McKay's production team, and they react quite well to it. In fact, Chris, I believe you have a quote from Adam McKay that tells us exactly what they were thinking with this movie.
In 2010, he says, "The idea is they've grown up and they hunt witches. It's a hybrid, sort of old-timey feeling, yet there's pump-action shotguns. Modern technology, but in an old style. We heard it and we were just like, that's a freaking franchise. You could make 3 of those."
Yep. So as you mentioned, this was definitely the time in Hollywood where people were franchise crazy. And you hear it right there. McKay, like, that was pitched to him, and their first thought, you can just hear it in what he says, right? Their first thought wasn't even, oh, how good is this one movie going to be? Like the dollar signs instantly formed of that's a franchise. We
Yep.
can merchandise this. We can make multiple sequels. So that's clearly what they were thinking and where they're heading with this. We should also mention that this was also happening at a time in Hollywood where there was just like this like kind of craze going on at the moment about kind of these fantasy based action films, right? Like this wasn't alone at the time. So this is, around the same time, you also have in 2012, we have Snow White and the Huntsman. People remember that the Charlize Theron, Kristen Stewart, Chris Hemsworth Snow White action film. You have Mirror Mirror in 2012. You have Jack the Giant Slayer in 2013, the Bryan Singer, I know he who shall not be named film. In 2012, you also have Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. In 2014, you have I, Frankenstein. So there was like all these kind of like dark fantasy action movies. And so Hansel and Gretel, Witch Hunter, slotted into that perfectly. So you have, oh man, we can get like a rising star in this. It's from a director of a much buzzed about horror film. It's so set up to be a franchise, and it's hitting on this trend that's already kind of percolating. Of course, everybody like leapt onto this.
Yeah, it actually was the most financially successful out of all the films you just mentioned, and having the smallest budget as well. So this was highly profitable for Gary Sanchez Productions. Yeah. Actually, I did find while you were giving some backstory, Workola was actually contacted by the producer, Kevin Messick from the production company, and right after watching the screening of Dead Snow at Sundance, and Workola has a quote here. So my first meeting, my first day in Los Angeles, was with those guys, and I pitched Hansel and Gretel, and they loved it. And they took me to Paramount 2 days after, and we sold it. I'm still surprised that they went for it, because it's a crazy rock and roll script. It's full throttle. There's lots of blood and gore and bad language. I often wonder how I got this movie made. It's all across the world now, but people really seem to respond to it, which is what we hoped, that people would enjoy this ride.
It really is. Like, you look back on it, and I guess, again, we're going to talk about how we feel about the movie, but whatever else you say about it, that story right there, that is like the ultimate Hollywood story.
100%.
Right? And you kind of like hearing that because that's something that doesn't seem like it happens as much anymore. And I kind of miss those days, like that excitement of, well, I guess actually there's a recent example of it, and I'll mention that in a moment. But in general, this seems like it's something that we saw a lot more back in the day, right? When we were younger and in the past of the, an up-and-coming hotshot director coming off of one kind of buzzed about film, going to Hollywood. As he says, like his very first meeting, he pitches an idea he'd been sitting on since film school, and these two super successful producers, Will Ferrell and Adam McKay, they like it. Then they go to Paramount, and Paramount likes it, and they finance it. He gets it made with, legit stars. That's crazy, and you just don't see that anymore on that level. I'd say the only recent example I can think of that is close, but at a much smaller budget level, is Rob Savage, the director of Host, the 2020 Zoom horror film,
yeah.
Right, which he made like over the span of a few weeks during the COVID-19 pandemic, and then was like kind of a huge immediate hit when it debuted on Shudder, and people around the world loved it. And right away he got multiple deals, including working with Sam Raimi. Raimi produced his next film. He's already got another film on the festival circuit that's getting a lot of acclaim, and he's signed on to some other projects. But those are all still smaller projects. To go from Dead Snow to a $50 million MGM movie, whatever else you can say, good on you, Workola. That's pretty awesome.
And he seems genuinely jacked to make this movie. Like, whatever we're gonna say about the movie and get into it a little later, the guy had a vision for this. Like, was you can tell it was percolating since he was younger. He was excited about it. It is a cool Hollywood story. You're so right. It rarely happens anymore. Typically, it's what the studio finds an indie director and then just manipulates them. Mm-hmm. It's rather than them pitching like a great like an original idea that they were holding to themselves. So no, you're so right. Well,
and when you say you can tell that like he was like so excited to make this, also you can just look at this movie and this is not a movie made by a pretentious person.
No, not at all.
Like, this is a movie made by someone who's just excited to be making this type of movie. Whether that's good or bad, I haven't said yet. But yeah, you can look at the movie and tell this is someone who's having fun with the money they've been given. Like that's kind of the vibe of this film. But maybe we should talk about the rest of the cast. So we know they get Jeremy Renner, and actually how they get Jeremy Renner is interesting because this is after he's already kind of, I guess, gotten over his franchise thing, and now he's obviously seeing himself as, oh, what if I could have 4 franchises? And apparently the way they cast him is they just show him a mock-up of a poster of Hansel and Gretel walking away from a witch burning in the background, and he says he liked that image so much that it intrigued him, and he ended up, and they actually ended up having to incorporate that image into the movie, probably just because it did cast him. I do want to actually, before we jump on, I do want to mention something. I found some quotes from Jeremy Renner that I think are worth mentioning, because to me, there's almost a level where it feels like he's kind of slightly shit-talking Mercola and the script while trying to be nice. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
So, okay, yeah. So he says, so he talks about how he loved that image and he found it incredibly interesting, so that's why he decided to do it. And he says, when I read the script, my first thought was, I can't believe this hasn't been done yet. It's such a great idea with so much potential. That dynamic was definitely a big thing. I love that what Tommy wrote left so much room for character. Okay, let's listen to that again. I love that what Tommy wrote left so much room for character. That seems to be him like subtly saying this character wasn't very much on the page.
No.
Right? I knew I could come in and do my thing and like gussy it up a little bit. So that's one of those things where it's like a little underhanded compliment, right? And then he also says that when he's looking back in the film later, he says that working on this film was a great escape. Quote, as this was a fairy tale with no stress like the other action movies I've done recently. I was having so much fun hanging on a wire like Peter Pan, hanging onto a broom and doing other crazy stuff. That was one of the most fun jobs I've ever had because there's something magical about that old world fantasy thing. End quote. So again, hearing him say like, I didn't have to stress about that one like everything else I did. It just seemed like he didn't take this very seriously necessarily. This seemed like we just said where Colo was having fun. I think Renner looked at this as just kind of like almost a vacation type movie.
Yes. Yeah, get out of the thumb of Kevin Feige for a while.
Yeah. And like the pressure, I bet he had to feel so much more pressure on Mission Impossible and Bourne Legacy, right? Because that was coming with such expectations. This is its own thing. No one knows what this movie is, right? So he can just kind of go in and have a ball making it.
Exactly. So now that we got Hansel, we got to get Gretel. And who do we get? We get a household name, Gemma Arterton.
Yeah. Not the first choice, though.
Not the first choice. We were looking at Noomi Rapace.
Who I love.
Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the original one.
Diane and Tommy Mercola, Noomi Rapace was cast and had to drop out, but Tommy Mercola actually does get to work with her later. I don't know if you noticed that, but he goes on to direct the 2017 Netflix film What Happened to Monday, which stars her as septuplets, actually.
Oh.
So he got to work with her and a lot. I guess not the general amount, but she got to play a lot of characters for him in one film.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I like her a lot too. I'm actually a huge defender of the movie Prometheus. I really like her in that. Another conversation. They also looked at Diane Kruger, who I absolutely love. She is from Inglourious Bastards. Love her in that. And, near and dear to our heart, Trev. Well, maybe near and dear to your loins, but her name is Eva Green. Eva Green, speaking of another potential Bond girl, or at the time Bond girl, Eva Green could have been in this role instead, which I would have been all for. I absolutely love Eva Green.
I'll give you one guarantee. If this was Jeremy Renner and Eva Green, or probably Jeremy Renner and Noomi Rapace, I would have seen this movie before we did this podcast. Yeah, I would have. That would have been more of a must see for me. As you said, Gemma Arterton, she's one of those actresses who I know, obviously, because she's a Bond girl. But yeah, she's just never. And I'm not. This isn't any statement on her like talent or anything. She's just never clicked. Right? There's just always been something's always kept her from reaching that next level. She got this role coming off of her performance in another kind of small little cult film, like this like neo-noir film called The Disappearance of Alice Creed from 2009. And apparently Mercola saw that and was very impressed with her. And having had Rapace just drop out, that's kind of where he chose her. But yeah, I think this was definitely, of all of her movies, I think this was the one that was most designed maybe to make her like a next level star. And obviously that doesn't happen, which is, as we said, kind of surprising considering the overall financial take of it. But yeah, just for whatever reason, I don't know. She's never hit.
Yeah, like obviously I was being glib when I said a household name, but everybody has seen her. Like you've seen her as we were saying from Quantum of Solace. She was in that Bond film. She was in Clash of the Titans, the reboot with Sam Worthington. She was also starred with Jake Gyllenhaal in Prince of Persia, a film that we will talk about one day. And yeah, like she pops up in things. What is she? She was in Runner, The Voices. Oh, I like The Voices. The Voices from 2014 with Ryan Reynolds. I actually like that movie a lot. And then a bunch of just other stuff. She's one of those actresses. You're right. She's just kind of there. She's a working actress.
Again, you can look at her. You can actually look at her filmography, and you can kind of clock that sad trajectory of someone who was at that level of like Hollywood thought she was like the next big thing.
Right.
And then you can kind of see that starting to dip off, and the movie's becoming less and less high profile as we get closer to today. So I don't know. There's always, she's young still, so there's always a chance. She's only 35. Whoop, no, never mind. By Hollywood standards, she is ancient. I take it back.
she's gonna play a grandmother in 3 years.
Yeah. Yep. But yeah. So just surprising that she never blew up. Just because she seems like the type who Hollywood would try harder to make into something. But
yeah.
Oh well.
Speaking of another Bond girl to round out the trio of the cast, this is the villain Muriel, the Bad Witch, Famke Janssen. Yeah, love Famke Janssen. I just recently watched rewatched GoldenEye in probably 20 years. I rewatched it a few weeks ago, and she played Xenia Onatopp. Fantastic name, by the way.
Yes, and one of the best Bond villains.
Yes, absolutely. And it's funny because Warkola actually had a crush on her, as I think we all did, from GoldenEye. And yeah, she was an amazing villain in there, and then she's cast as the villain here. And I think most people know from, yes, GoldenEye, but also obviously Jean Grey from the X-Men series. Yeah, I'm a big fan of her. It sucks that she's kind of like gone in recent years, and around this time she was kind of just the wife of Liam Neeson in Taken films, which is kind of upsetting. Her career kind of tanked a little bit in that sense.
Yeah, and I think she strikes me as someone who isn't super high on Hollywood nowadays. She was kind of publicly dismayed by being kind of replaced by Sophie Turner in the X-Men films, and always saying there could have been more room for her version of Jean Grey to still be in some of those later films. Even with this film, we should mention, she even admits that she took this film only for the money at first. She says she had a house to pay off, so that's why she took this movie. Although she does say that then she kind of came around to it, and ultimately got to a point where she had like a lot of nice things to say about Warkola and the process, and actually really liked playing this kind of pure villain. But she was pretty upfront at first to saying, I took that role because I needed some dough.
Yeah, 100%.
That is the main trio, but I also just want to mention there's a couple other cast members we'll mention as we do the review, but we should also mention that our good old buddy Peter Stormare is in this because Peter Stormare is legally required to be in a film like this made by a studio. That was probably Warkola couldn't get around that one, Yeah.
It's funny because we love Peter Stormare.
We do,
but every time he pops up, I get a little bit like, uh-oh. It's like a fork in the road, like it's either gonna go amazing or it's gonna go absolutely atrocious. And but he's always a highlight, which we'll get to. But
he is, and it's funny because, like I said, like when he popped up in this, I was like, I did have a moment of thinking, well, wait a minute, have I seen this movie before? And I just realized, oh no, he basically plays like a version of the same character in 2005's The Brothers Grimm, the Terry Gilliam movie, which is like very, very similar to this, and he's in that as well. I was like, oh no, I'm just thinking of that. So yeah, he's in a lot of movies like this. But
and then we just saw Dylan Dog for our podcast a while back, and he popped up playing a similar type of kid.
And honestly, he's probably been in at least 60% of the movies I've watched the past few months. It's just...
Oh man, Trev did a Puppet Master marathon. Does Peter Stormare ever pop up in the Puppet Master movies?
I never saw him on screen, but I have to assume he was maybe puppeteering one of the puppets. It's just...
He just showed up on set. They gave him one. Here you go, Peter.
He's waiting. But before I die, there'll probably be at least 18 more Puppet Master movies. He's gonna get in there sooner or later.
We can only hope.
All right, Chris. Well, do you want to, head off into the woods together, like a couple, young, naive siblings, and discover if we can enjoy this film like a candy treat, or if we have to throw it into the oven and burn it alive?
Let's go.
All right.
Me and my sister, we have a past. We almost died at the hands of a witch. But that past made us stronger. We'd gotten a taste of blood, witch blood. And we haven't stopped since.
My name is Gretel, and this is my brother Hansel.
I'm not going to have you telling me what to do.
How do you best kill a witch?
Cutting off her head tends to work.
Hate that one.
The last 2 weeks, we had 5 children taken from us.
A witch does not come out in the open like that. I don't think we're hunting witches. There's something else going on here.
We have to find those kids.
Let's start with this. Shoot anything that moves.
I see you got my invitation.
I have my sister. Well, that's new.
Hell yeah!
Morning, sunshine.
You gotta be kidding me.
Okay, let's throw this.
You know what's great about this movie? This is one where it'll be very easy to talk about the plot.
Okay. Many years after a horrific experience with a witch in a deceptively inviting gingerbread house, orphans Hansel and Gretel are now famous witch hunters. Despite their stellar success, the brother and sister face a new challenge when the extremely powerful witch Muriel begins stealing children from a local village with the intent to sacrifice them in a magical blood moon ceremony. As Hansel and Gretel race against the clock, making several allies along the way, they unexpectedly come across a link to their past, including a dark secret their parents took with them when they disappeared.
You know what's interesting, Chris, is sometimes I listen to you read your movie summary at the top of this, and I think to myself, as I'm listening to you, I'm clocking and thinking, oh, okay, well, that's a pretty good, like, basic summary, but there's definitely some pieces you couldn't fit in that we're going to have to get to in our discussion. Not this time. That's pretty much everything. You pretty much just covered the entirety of this, because as I said, it's a fairly short film, and not an overly complex one.
No.
But I'll let you go first, Chris, because this was a first time watch for both of us, and I'm just curious to hear what you thought of Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. Okay, well, so join us next time for Failure to Franchise.
At F2F Pod on Twitter.
Yeah,
Yeah, the movie is it almost feels like barely a movie. I know we say that every once in a while, but this movie is there had to have been 30 minutes of this film on the cutting room floor, right? Like, it feels like it's been poked and prodded at, snipped, assembled, taken apart. It's almost incoherent, and by almost, I mean mostly. It just seems edited to hell. There is some charm to the actors. I'm not even going to say characters, because there is barely meat to any bone on any character at all. This just feels like a lot of scenes for 90 minutes. I mean, did I like it? I think I liked some of it. I think I was entertained enough. I think it gets a little confused in its tone. is it trying to take a piss out of the genre here, or is it trying to be cool and awesome? I was just a little confused, more than anything else. And yeah, I feel like, okay, so I never like drink alcohol when I watch movies that we do for the podcast. This one felt like I probably should have.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, yeah, no, I totally know what you mean. Yeah.
This one felt like I should have been inebriated for, and I think I would have had a fucking rip-roaring time.
It's interesting because I feel like this is the type of movie I might have loved when I was 13 or 14.
Yes.
You know? And it's not that the movie has changed, it's that I've changed as I've gotten older, and also we've just had so many other movies like this. Some worse, some better, but there's just this level of monotony to this kind of genre now that this movie doesn't break through. And what I found frustrating about this is, Chris, I want to read you some more quotes or some more information about this film, right? In terms of the people who made it talking about it. So, for instance, Dante Harper was hired to kind of come on and rewrite the script. And he says that one of his, kind of aims was to give it a gory but funny Shaun of the Dead vibe. Adam McKay says that the inspirations for this movie were Sam Raimi's early horror comedy films, of course, like Evil Dead, Army of Darkness, but also John Carpenter's movies, he says, which we all love. And we were all hugely influenced by the first Matrix. McKay also says the Bourne Supremacy movies and the way Oliver Wood shot those. You throw all of that into a pot, mix it up, and you get this film. Tommy Wirkola cited Quentin Tarantino as an influence, and also talked about Peter Jackson's Brain Dead, which is known in North America as Dead Alive. What drove me insane was seeing how many people talking about this movie compared to Tarantino. Wirkola did, Famke Janssen did, a couple other people did. But so, Adam McKay also brought up Kick-Ass, the hyper cartoon violence and very specific world of Kick-Ass. So I love all those movies we just mentioned. And to hear them say that that's what was the inspiration for all this, and then you look at this film, something went awry, because this doesn't feel like those at all. Now, I guess you can kind of look at it and tell it's trying to be those, but boy, is it never quite getting there. And you're definitely right that it just feels... It feels like there might be a better movie in there, but it has been really kind of chopped up and edited, and you said it races along so quickly that you never feel that involved. I honestly felt like, story-wise and where we're thrown in, this felt like episode 4 or 5 of like a season of a show called Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. This story doesn't feel epic enough to be a movie. It certainly doesn't feel epic enough to be the introductory movie to these characters. And it definitely doesn't feel big enough to leave you wanting more. As you just said, that sounds really harsh, but as you just said, did I enjoy it? There are moments to enjoy in here.
Yes.
There are sequences to enjoy. There's some really fun action stuff. There are some fun performances. But it's frustrating because despite all that, there's always something keeping you from crossing over into the level of loving it. And it just, I think this is a movie, I watched this a few days ago, and I was talking to you before we started recording about how I was actually kind of worried about trying to remember stuff. And I think it's a movie by next week I'll have almost completely forgotten.
Mm-hmm. And I think what it is the character stuff. A movie like this can have fun stunts and fun action and fun gore. There's something about, there's a simple pleasure watching Jeremy Renner run after animalistic witches in a forest, evading magic and shooting his shotgun and then body slamming a witch into a tree trunk and it's splitting in half. Like, that's fun. That's fun. Yeah. But I need to care about Hansel and Gretel. And I got a quote here from Gemma Arterton. She says, Hansel and Gretel have this unstoppable bond that they're also so different from each other. She's the brains of the operation. He's the brawn. He's the joker and the show-off. She's more the watcher, the researcher, the one who tries to really understand witchcraft. Trev, is any of that in the movie?
It's not. And I'll push that even further, Chris, and I'll tell you something I wrote in my notes as I was watching this. I want to hear your thought on this. I know you don't like necessarily when I rewrite movies, but this isn't even rewriting movies. This is just rethinking character dynamic. Yeah. Because as I was watching the film, I was just thinking about how it felt so similar to so many other movies we've seen in this mold, in this vein. And as you just said, she mentions it's way more underplayed and underdeveloped than what she made it sound in that quote. But she's right that essentially Gretel is the smart one, and Hansel is the jokester, right? He's the one who doesn't take it seriously. He's the one flirting with women. He's the one who ends up sleeping with the woman in the movie, right? And I was just thinking, how much more interesting would this movie be if Jeremy Renner was playing the really brainy, nerdy, like leader of the duo, and they allowed Gretel to be like the body, sexual, I don't take it seriously member of the duo. We're at this point in Hollywood where they never let a female character be that in a Hollywood movie, right? They have to be tough, and they have to be, very stoic and heroic. And I was thinking, man, imagine if she could be drunk all the time in this movie, or if she could just be like jackass who doesn't take things seriously, and he's getting frustrated with her. That in my head just sounds like way more interesting, because you go into this film and you know the dynamic you're going to get before you even start watching it. I could just look at the poster and tell you, oh, if one of these two is like the funny one and the one who is like, always causing problems, it's going to be Renner. And she's going to be like the tough, capable hero. So that's something where you could just swapped it. Maybe it'd be a little bit more interesting, because it'd be something. And unfortunately, the movie isn't offering hardly anything.
It's really not. And they try, like, they give Hansel diabetes?
Diabetes.
This is very weird too. Like, because for a movie that's so over the top and goofy, this is the like one weird element of forced realism or something, right? Saying, well, I guess if Hansel and Gretel had been held prisoner in this house for, a long time when they were kids and fed all this sugar. First of all, this isn't the way diabetes works. You wouldn't get diabetes from that.
Exactly.
But putting that aside, obviously that's not the truth. But like that's the idea. Like, well, what would be like the actual ramifications of that? Well, I guess he can have diabetes, but like, it also doesn't matter. It's brought up early in the movie, and it never really becomes a concern. We just learn he has to take a shot like every half hour or so, but that doesn't ultimately become the complication you would think it would. So why bother?
Yeah, and that's what I mean when I say about the editing. I have to assume that there was at least some drama when it comes to where's his injection, and like, oh, they're out in the woods for a day, and oh man, it broke, and we got to get him back to town or something. Because there's a moment where a witch does take Hansel, like he's strapped onto the broom, and the witch takes off in the middle of the night while he's trying to get her, and leaves him for dead in the forest. And you'd think, like, I think there's maybe a throwaway line of like, I got diabetes or something, but it's like it never really becomes anything at all. Yeah. And you're right. That's a great term, that forced realism. This movie's so over the top. There's pump action shotguns. There's a machine gun crossbows, which I like from Van Helsing. But
I know, yeah.
Yeah. But this one just feels kind of. It's just all over the place. It's all over the place. Like, even like I like Famke Janssen, like I said before. And I really like the look of the witches, by the way. There's like they've got like a cracked marble skin to them, and they're pretty over the top, and they're pretty fun. They're kind of sexy, and it may have unlocked something in me that I'm not. I'm not. Anyway, okay, okay. But and it's got campy gore, just like Dead Snow did. There's a great gag where Muriel, the lead witch, rips a guy's brain out with her hand from the side of his head, and like that's awesome.
Yeah.
Like, there's moments, like you said, there's moments of fun, but I think you nailed it by saying you're watching it at a different time in your life. And that goes back to what I was saying about Dead Snow, is I saw that in a different circumstance at a different age. I know if I watched Dead Snow now, it would I would not like it, like, at all. And I think we're flooded by movies like this. This hyper stylized, cartoony horror comedy, and there's it's just kind of lost.
For this show we watched another one, like the Hellboy reboot was in the same vein, right? And we had some of the same issues with that. And again, you can have that had some fun performances and stuff, but you need to have something more special now if you're going to make one of these, because there's just been so many. It's like the superhero films, right? Like, and how we've talked about, those are tiresome to a certain degree now, and it's the same thing with this. And going back to that forced realism thing, I was just reading too, and I was looking for this while you were speaking, because I remember reading this. So this idea that, well, he has the diabetes, right? Or as they call it in the movie, sugar sickness.
Diabetes.
But she has nothing. But in the original script, Gretel was suffering from an eating disorder.
Yes.
because of what they went through, and they dropped that. And that brings me back to what I was saying, right? You know that was like in a script, and then at some point somebody said, you can't have the female character have an eating disorder.
Totally.
Right? That's insensitive. We can't do that. You can't depict that. We can't put that on screen. And they're like, well, what about him and the diabetes? That's fine. You know? So it's like the same thing with like, you know, you and I know have talked about Rey in the Star Wars trilogy and how they never let her get too hurt or too injured. And like contrasting that over to like the original Colin Trevorrow script for our episode 9, which saw her get, you know, a lightsaber slashed across her eyes and blind her, and you just realize they would never do that, in these Hollywood films. And it's the same thing. Like we can't let the female hero have an eating disorder because they're worried about, you know, they're probably worried about
the social ramifications.
Right, exactly. And so, not that I'm saying the movie should have the eating disorder or diabetes, but this is what I'm talking about how her character is so one note that it puts all the pressure on Jeremy Renner to be like the fun character, to be the more notable character. But that's really unfair to her because it kind of just leaves her out to dry. There's just nothing compelling about her. I see all these quotes from Arterton where she's talking about how she says, you know, this character is very feminist. She's quite full on. You know, she says she's much more in tune with her spiritual side. She's a typical action hero, cheeky, funny, a womanizer. She's much more of a thinker. Oh, no, she was talking about Hansel's a typical action hero, cheeky, funny womanizer. She's much more of a thinker, intense, internal, and a bit more open-minded than he is. But like you said, where is that in the movie?
Yeah.
She just is like, she's a person that stands there.
Can I cut in here? Because this is where the movie kind of breaks for me. Hearing that quote and hearing how she's so feminist and she doesn't get to have any fun or anything. There's an attempted rape scene in this movie.
Okay.
And this, yeah. I need to talk about this just because this is a huge sticking point with me.
I want to talk about this too, for sure. I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah.
And it stems off from what you're saying. She's not allowed to have any fun. Okay. And we watched the extended cut. And I looked into this, and apparently this scene is trimmed way, way down for the theatrical, and they should have kept it that way. Because first and foremost, can I just get off the bat? I discussed this with one of my coworkers actually a couple weeks ago. This might sound controversial to say, but I really dislike rape scenes.
I don't think that's controversial.
No, I know. That's what I was being glib, obviously. But rape scenes to me are very upsetting. And I've never, if you're going to do a rape scene in a movie, you better have a fucking damn good reason to do it. It's kind of like when they kill like a puppy or something in a movie. Like it just seems like it seems cheap. It's easy. It's gross. It's
that's
just
the problem with rape scenes is it's way too often been used as the quickest way to make someone a villain.
Yes.
And
to give the female agency. So all of a sudden, why? Oh, she needs to get almost raped for me to actually care that Gretel is gonna now get revenge. Like, it's so fucking simple, and I just think it's gross, and I don't like rape scenes, and it's always bothered me in movies. It's like the one scene in movies that I just get very, very, very uncomfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, I've often so as someone who watches like a lot of exploitation movies of the 60s and 70s and loves them, and I'm a big fan of a number of rape revenge films. Right. So I have like this like kind of complicated thought system about scenes like this, and I've definitely pushed back against an idea that I've seen recently expressed, quite often online of how there just should never be any rape scenes anymore in films. And I say like, well, I don't know that you can go that far because it is a thing that happens in real life, and as you said, sometimes it can actually. You can do it for like, that sounds weird to say you can do it for the right reason, but you can do it for something that actually impacts the story in a meaningful way. The problem is 95 or 98% of them are just done for the reasons we just talked about. Even worse when they're done for titillation. That's the ultimate worst. But the one in this film, it was the same thing with me where I had to like look up afterwards and see like, oh, of course that wasn't in the theatrical. And it made me really wish I had watched the theatrical because we were just talking about how we were talking about the forced realism, how it feels out of place. Everything about this movie is so damn cartoony and goofy. And then you get to that rape scene, and it is actually really ugly. It's like ugly and upsetting, and like it's not. Sounds so weird, but they're not even trying to play that like in any kind of goofy way, which I have seen done, right? And they're not, and not that makes it any better, but it's just weird how suddenly it gets so dark and serious, and it's such a tonal. Jarring punch to the head that it made me feel like very gross too. I did not like that at all.
But Trev, it's not even that. It cross cuts between Hansel getting laid Hansel is getting laid with this super hot chick in this idyllic setting, in this nice like sauna bath, and it's cutting back and forth between they're hooking up, she's naked and very attractive, and Hansel's goofy and fun, but it's cutting back and forth to seeing Gretel almost being raped. It was like so bafflingly put together. I don't know. It's just that's honestly when the movie like really broke for me. That I'm like, okay, well, I just like don't like this movie.
Well, like you said, like it's so unnecessary. Not that it would be necessary for at all, but it's being done to make you hate Peter Stormare's character even more because he's the one attempting to rape her. But we already hate him. The movie's already made clear he's an asshole. He's the sheriff of this town. It's the town where they've been hired to kind of come and find witches. They discovered quite early on that the women he was putting forward as witches were innocent. So they've kind of exposed him as a fake, and they're trying to help the mayor uncover the real witches. So he has this kind of axe to grind with them, and so he refuses to work with them. He refuses to give them access to the town's files and things. And then later on, him and his men attack Gretel and try to rape her. But you already hate him. This is just so unnecessary. And then I guess if you kind of confront them on it, they'd say, well, we use that moment to turn the troll good because so there's this giant troll named Edward who works for Muriel, and at this point we've only seen him as a villain. He helps the witches kidnap the children, but he's watching this attempted rape, and suddenly he comes charging out and he saves Gretel, and he kills the would-be rapists, which again takes like the moment the heroism away from her. She has to be saved by this man, even if it's a troll. So still kind of weird.
Sure.
But also like there are ways to have him turn good and do that without having the rape. So yeah, just that is a movie breaking part for sure. You're right. I bet you the theatrical cut, which does not have that, would be it'd be a more entertaining movie for sure without that in there.
Yeah, because I couldn't stop thinking about it. Honestly, I really couldn't. I just felt so out of place. It completely turned off the fun. Yeah, so I just want to get that out of the way. That one is just crazy, so weird to see. So weird.
That's a good point to make because you say it turns off the fun, and I don't think we should gloss over that. I think the problem with that is that that's not just you saying like for you can't stop thinking about it. It's that when that happens, it makes you question what is this movie trying to be.
Yeah,
like you literally are now saying, well, wait, I thought this was just a goofy cartoony movie, but is it supposed to be like darkly serious now? And like that's what you mean about it breaking, because then you can't stop thinking about it because you're like, well, is the movie gonna do that again? Am I supposed to be expecting more shit like that? Like that's why it feels so out of place, because it kind of never does come back around to that. So then you're really left wondering, why was that just stuck into the middle of the movie? And if I want to push, okay, so we can finally move off that because it's really not worth talking about. Just it sucks. It shouldn't have been done.
Yeah.
But beyond that, like even again, slight rewriting the movie thing. Another thing where I wonder if this is speaking to your point about there probably being different versions of the script or stuff being cut out. Did you think it was kind of strange that once it's revealed the tragic backstory of Hansel and Gretel, who are we know are orphans as the story starts, their parents sent them off into the woods, and that's when they were taken by the switch. We eventually learn that there are two kinds of witches, which Hansel and Gretel have never realized before. There are the evil witches that Muriel and her crew represents, but then there are white witches. White witches are actually witches who work for good, and they discovered that their mom was a white witch. And what happens is, Muriel back then, you kind of alluded to this in your summary, but Muriel and her witches are trying to do this blood moon ritual that will allow witches to finally be impervious to fire, because that is their biggest weakness. But they need the heart of a white witch. So they were going after their Hansel and Gretel's mother, and she sent them off to kind of protect them. And unfortunately, then both she and her husband were killed by like the townspeople who discovered she was a witch. But the reason she had to kind of protect them is because this means Gretel also has the heart of a white witch.
Yeah.
So isn't the next natural step to reveal that Gretel is a witch herself and has magical powers?
You'd think so.
Right? Like, how does that...
You'd think so.
Yeah, exactly, right? And that's not what happens. And I thought, like, what? Like, so you just end the movie and they're still just both, like, gun-toting badasses? You don't take the next step and say, oh, isn't this interesting? She spent her whole life hating witches, but now she discovers she is a witch? It's just so baffling that they didn't take that step.
Well, even like... we talked about this in our introductions episode to this podcast and joking about how most of these types of movies that want to build a franchise have that, that end coda scene where they're like, on to the next adventure, like we'll get them next time, boys, and all that stuff. I was totally expecting her to whip out at least a wand.
Yeah.
Like, just give her a wand and okay, Gretel's actually like training in the magical arts now or something. But nothing at all. It is so weird. There's actually two reveals like that, again, what's the reasoning if you're not going to make it about the character? The biggest one is what you're saying, is that Gretel should become a witch and should recognize that she's a witch, and then maybe there's a fracture or something within the brother and sister relationship, like they have to deal with that truth. But then there's also, I told you about Hansel getting down with this girl, Mina. She's like this girl they meet along the way, and the townspeople think she's a witch in the beginning of the movie, but then they save her because she's like, no, she's too hot to be a bad witch. Like they check her teeth and her hair, and there's like, she's not a witch. But then it's revealed later on that Mina is one of these white witches, one of these good witches. But it happens weirdly not where it should. And follow me along with this, Trev, because nearing the end of the movie, Muriel, Famke Janssen, the villain, has lured Hansel and Gretel back to the original candy house where they were as kids. And they're fighting in there. And then Mina shows up to help with her witchcraft. But we already know as the viewer that she is a good witch. Mm-hmm. Shouldn't that be the moment where it's revealed? Like, yes. When, at the Deus Ex Machina, she shows up, she reveals herself, Hansel's like, holy shit, you automatically now you explore Hansel vowing his whole life to destroying witches, but then he's actually fallen for one. He slept with one. Does this affect their mission? Does it fracture them? Do they have second thoughts? This movie doesn't do any of that. Mm-hmm. And it's right there. It's right there, and that's so frustrating to watch. As much as I love a movie that's 90 minutes long, this movie needed another 20 minutes.
Dude, imagine a version of this movie that ends with them setting off on their next adventure. You get like the post-credit scene or mid-credit scene like we get here, right? But you have a version of Hansel who, as we just said, has grown up his whole life hating witches. And now he realizes he's like slept with one. He's kind of in love with one. Mm-hmm. And then he sees his sister, like they're fighting a bad witch, and he sees his sister use magic. And she looks at him, and he kind of gives her like a thumbs up or whatever. But you see in his eye like a little like like a little suspicion, right? And then you're leading into the next movie like with that as the thing hanging over it, right? They still have to work together. They still clearly love each other, but now he's like suspicious of her. Yeah. Maybe you even throw in a little bit about how white witches have the tendency to go bad, right? Or there being a danger of white witches being corruptible. Like, make it interesting. There's the potential is all here, and they just never take it. This is way too simple.
And then we get a Hansel v. Gretel, for the sequel. Like, you can have your schlock, you can have your mindlessness, you can have your cartoony stuff, but this movie just needed that little bit of drama, that little bit of character. Like, again, when I said earlier that there's barely any meat on these characters' bones, like, I mean it. Like, I really do. Like, they're not characters. They are mostly caricatures. And that is this movie's detriment. There's seeds of good here. There's seeds of fun. But it never commits. Never.
Well, that's what ultimately, that's my big thesis statement about this film, is this film actually does, as is true with many movies we've covered on this podcast, this movie really does reveal the problem with Hollywood, in that this guy who worked at a film school heard Tommy Wirkola say this pitch, right? This idea of Hansel and Gretel grow up to be witch hunters after the fairy tale. And he said, that idea is so good, I know Hollywood will make it. And he was right. All Wirkola had to do was walk into a room and say, here it is, guys. After the fairy tale, Hansel and Gretel become witch hunters. And a room full of people, in two separate occasions, listened to that and said, that is genius. We can make multiple movies. We can, this will be a trilogy. We'll give you $50 million. We'll get some real actors. And that's where the entire idea stopped, was Hansel and Gretel become witch hunters. You and I just spent 15 minutes coming up with ideas to make this a little bit more complex and a little bit more interesting, and nobody involved cared. They all just said, Hansel and Gretel, they're witch hunters now. That's the title. They hunt witches. Don't you get it? Isn't that cool? And like everybody involved just like, yeah, man, like people are going to love this. Hansel and Gretel, they're witch hunters because they hate witches. And like nobody thought to say, okay, yes, but what about like this dynamic? What about this? What if she becomes a witch? What if now he's suspicious of her? Nope, they're witch hunters. That should be enough. And that's exactly the problem. Like it's why the movie clips along at a nice pace. It's why it's like a kind of fun just action movie, sure, but it's also why it doesn't stick with you. It's why it's in one ear and out the other as you watch it. It's just so it's so surface level. This is a surface level movie, but totally.
And then to say all the inspirations for this movie.
Yeah.
You know, like you said, Brain Dead by Peter Jackson, all these memorable movies with memorable scenes, memorable characters, to reference Army of Darkness, and then you just get this completely, 2D, just picture, you know what I mean? Like
to have multiple people mention Tarantino. What's the memorable Tarantino-esque dialogue from this movie that you remember? Because I don't remember a damn thing.
Well, and that's what's weird. Like you said, people were mentioning it so much, and actually, Gemma Arterton had said this many times as well. It's kind of got a Tarantino feel. She says Werkol had a strong vision for the film. That's like what brought her to have a great time making it, and I just don't see it. And we haven't mentioned this, but Paramount did make 2 cuts of this film. Hey, like they test screened it at a rated R and a PG-13 version. So. Where is this? Apparently the R-rated version tested well, and that was the one that was released. But like, again, I don't see the inspiration by any of these things. I mean, and maybe that's because everything is thrown in a blender. Maybe that's what it is. It just doesn't stand out. And it sounds like I'm stumbling over my words right now because I really am. It's just because this movie is frustrating.
Well, it sounds like when I hear people say like, well, this was clearly influenced by, Sam Raimi's movies and Peter Jackson's movies and John Carpenter's movies. I hate to say this because I'm not saying I'm more talented than the people who made this movie. Of course I'm not. I'm not saying I'm better than any of them. But it does sound sometimes like people don't understand what made those movies magical and what made them special and what people latched onto, because Brain Dead is not a classic just because it has gore. It's because of how inventive and over the top the gore is. Sam Raimi's movies aren't just fun because they have gore. It's because of how dynamic his shots were and how how unique his compositions were and the filmmaking style, which you'd never seen before. That's not here. Yes, this movie has some fun gore, and yes, some of the action scenes are fun, but there's nothing overly dynamic about it. There's nothing super creative about it. This feels kind of perfunctory and workmanlike in a lot of ways. So you can't just throw a bunch of blood at us. I mean, you can, and I will enjoy some of it. I'm not lying. Like you said, there are some fun gore moments here, but that's not enough. If you don't have a Sam Raimi camera style, or if you don't have Peter Jackson's commitment and willingness to go super over the top with it and just douse the screen in blood, then ultimately all you end up with is a movie like this where it's kind of boring, but every 5 minutes or so you go, oh, that was a cool gore gag. Yeah.
And like one of those, I mean, the end climactic battle is fun. It's they are going to do the blood moon ceremony, and there's like 100 witches there, and they're all kind of unique looking. There's this there's one that I like that was kind of it's almost like a Siamese twin on the back of it, Can we say Siamese twin anymore? Is that a thing?
You just did, so we'll go with it.
Okay, we'll go with it. And she shoots it in the middle of its back, and they kind of split apart, but they're still together. And they start crawling on the ground, and it's cool to see. This one witch is just a torso of a witch, and she's running around, and Jeremy Renner kicks her off a cliff and then shoots her in the air. Like, that's all fun. There's a chain gun, like Gatling gun, like shooting all of the witches. But again, at this point, I don't care about anybody in this movie at all. And again, it does become like junk food. And maybe that's what they were going for, and that's fine. I love myself a Big Mac. And after the Big Mac, it's over, it's done. You know what I mean? So I'm not opposed to that. But maybe that's the reason why, again, this movie made $226 million. This movie was a huge hit. And there's nothing that came from this. Nothing.
Well, no, and this is what we're getting to earlier. Is like I said, this is a schlock movie for sure, and that's why I mentioned if I was 13 or 14, I'd like it more because I think when you're younger, you're just more generally accepting of schlock, and as you get older, and you realize how much schlock Hollywood hands you, it starts to be a little overwhelming. And you start to be a more discerning schlock viewer. And that's the thing. Is like, I completely agree with what you just said, Chris, is that I have nothing against schlock, and I don't even begrudge them if that's all they wanted this movie to be. But that just means there's nothing about it that's going to connect to me on a bigger level. Yeah. And I will say, this tends to be true. You tend to see movies like this. These are the type of movies that tend to perform better in international markets. And actually, that does speak to like the simplicity of them. You know, other cultures don't have to... it's easier for them to make the international version because there's no kind of cultural problems in terms of translation. The plot is very simple. It's just all action. These are the American movies that tend to like perform better in other countries than they do here. And I guess I'm not saying that makes us smarter or better. I'm just saying we get so many of them that we just look at something like this and go, oh yeah, another one of those. That's what this was. I was watching this and going, yeah, another one of those. You know. Yep. We mentioned all those movies earlier that came out around the same time. I mentioned Brothers Grimm. This just felt like another one. And I wish it was more. Unfortunately, I would not to be DJ Khaled or anything here, but another one.
Another one.
And what did you think too? I guess we should mention. Well, before I get into it, let me just quickly throw out some of the things I did like, because you just said some nice things, and I do want to just parrot that just for a moment. I don't know if I said pigeon. No, not pigeon.
You're about to say pigeonhole me into a corner.
No, I want to parrot you and say, yes, there's some fun gore, and you were definitely right that. The creature designs are pretty great in this. The witches look awesome. I really like the look of Edward, the troll. I thought he was very, very cool.
Fun fact.
Played by Derek Mears.
Yes, and I'm sure you're about to say that he played Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th, the reboot that we also talked about in a previous episode. But also, when I was watching this movie, I was like, man, that looks like a character ripped out of the Hellboy movies from Del Toro. And wouldn't you know it, the creature was created by Spectral Motion. The same company who did work with Del Toro in the Hellboy movies. So that was pretty cool to see because I really liked the design of Edward. I thought he moved really well. He looked really good. He looked like an actual living creature, you know. Yeah. And that's one thing, like, and you're getting to it. I'm probably stepping over you. I apologize, but the commitment to practical effects is pretty awesome in this movie. Yeah,
no, that was for sure. There's some really good practical gore. You know, it's not all CGI gore, which is really nice to see in a movie like this. Yeah. And yeah, the witches are like, that's practical makeup. Edward is a practical creation. So yeah, I dug all that stuff as well. So as we said, if you sit down and watch this movie, try to watch theatrical so you don't have to deal with the ugly rape scene, but you will be entertained by chunks of it. So I think we're ended up sounding like more negative than we ultimately are.
Totally, yeah.
But I think the point we're making is that you'll sit down, you won't be bored. You'll have a fairly good time watching it, and then once it's over, you'll be like, "Wait, what did I just watch? What was that called again?" Like that's the thing is, there's nothing about it that sticks with you.
And sometimes that's okay. Like me and you have had this conversation before. Not everything needs to be a masterpiece, and not everything is a piece of shit. Most movies are just okay, and that is totally fine. The issue with this one is that it gives you glimpses of something that could make it great and then just fucking tosses it out the window. And I think that's where we come down on it.
Yeah, there's two issues. There's that, and there's the fact that, as you just said, sometimes it's fine to be the other thing, but this was a movie that was supposed to set up more movies.
Exactly.
Like, you can't start a franchise with that kind of, like, oh, whatever. You know, you can make one and be like, okay, that's fine. And there are movies like that I enjoy where it's like, yeah, that was nothing special, but it was what it was. But when you have Adam McKay saying, oh, man, that pitch, we're going to make so many of these. Well, no, you're not. Not if you're just going to give us this. And I guess history, plays that out. But before we get into that, should we do a quick score horror moment? Because I don't know that I necessarily have so much to say about the score, but I do have something to say about a very odd credit, which I'd never seen before. As the opening credits played, Chris, did you clock that Hans Zimmer was credited as the executive music producer?
Yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah, but then the score was done by Atle Overson, who was, of course, worked with Zimmer on the Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. So I'm sure you did too, I had to kind of look into that and see what did that mean. And as far as I can tell, it essentially meant Hans Zimmer said, like, I think you should do it kind of like this, and then Overson did all the work.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
As is the case, it seems, with a lot of proteges of Zimmer. But this was the first time seeing the actual credit. It was just a very odd one, And it's not even that the score is bad. It actually is a lot better in the beginning of the movie. Did you feel that way? Same way too? Like in the beginning, like kind of prologue, there's some music that I actually quite enjoyed, but then it becomes just kind of your typical run of the mill, this kind of movie music.
Yeah, there was a pretty decent theme playing over the opening credits. I thought. And I actually kind of also liked the opening credits, the way that kind of gives like the the story of how they went from being the small children of the fairy tale to now the grown-up witch hunters we see. Like, I thought the opening credits were fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I said, this isn't like a score I'm going to listen to or anything, but it serves its purpose in the movie. I just really wanted to talk about that credit, because I'd never seen that before. I'd never seen a more famous composer just get like what's essentially an honorary title in the credits.
Yeah. High Fives by Hans Zimmer. Mm-hmm. So obviously this didn't get sequels. It didn't get anything. This just kind of died on the vine. But they did have the sequel planned, and actually Tommy Wirkola had it written. And it's actually still in his IMDb credit as it's written by. So do you think that'll be ever picked up?
Well, it kind of, I've seen how it keeps popping up a little bit, right? Or it certainly did in the years that followed this. At this point, I think it's a lost cause.
Yes.
I think if it was going to happen, it would have had to happen within the first 4 years after this, and the fact that it didn't, I think, just means it won't. It actually is surprising to me for a couple of reasons, and I know we both want to talk about why we think so. But as you said, it did actually do quite well. It was a huge success for Paramount once you factor in the international success, and it also set off a string of Hansel and Gretel movies at the time. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the Asylum swooped in and made their mockbuster Hansel and Gretel, which of course they would. But Sci-Fi Channel did a movie called Witch Slayer Gretel. Lionsgate made a movie called Hansel and Gretel: Warriors of Witchcraft. I remember there was a film with one with Lara Flynn Boyle called Hansel and Gretel Get Baked, which I think was like a pothead version of Hansel and Gretel. And this kind of continued on, right? Even a year or so ago, Oz Perkins directed Gretel and Hansel, which was the kind of art house horror version of Hansel and Gretel. I don't know if you saw that one, Chris, but. So yeah, there's still an itch for these kind of movies. So given that Jeremy Renner has only become I would say a bigger star since then because of the continuing grow of the MCU, given the financial success, why do you think the sequel hasn't happened?
Well, I don't know why it wouldn't happen in general, but I definitely know why it didn't happen with Tommy Wirkola and Jeremy Renner. Renner really only wanted to come back if he was going to work with Wirkola. Mm-hmm. And then, it just took forever to get going, and then it was going by the wayside. They had a 2016 release date planned for the second one, and then it just kind of fell apart. But in September 2014, Wirkola actually announced that he would not be directing it. And he said, I want to do something a little bit different now, and not just do sequels. I did write the script, and I hope to be involved in it. But yeah, I won't be directing it. The first film was a learning curve for me, working in the studio system, and the script I wrote for the original was so different than the final movie. We ended up taking a lot out and altering stuff that first time. I tried taking what I learned and still delivered a sequel script that's an R-rated action film.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's kind of what put the kibosh on that, right? Because Adam McKay had previously said that Paramount was kind of insisting on the sequel being PG-13.
Yes.
Which is interesting, to go from a successful R-rated film and suddenly say, well, now we got to go PG-13. I get it, because obviously there's always that thought that PG-13 will give you more box office. But other than, of course, the go-to example, everyone loves Police Academy. But I can't think of another franchise that started with an R-rated film and then went to PG-13, which, seemed to continue that same level of success, because it's almost like you're telling the audience we feel like we screwed up the first time or something, or we're backtracking now. So why would you remove one of the elements that people seem to like about the first one, which I would assume was the violence and the gore?
Yeah.
So if Wirkola was like, well, I only really want to be involved if it's R-rated again, and the studio saying no, then yes, you have Wirkola drop out. They did sign another director, Bruno Avalian, as in 2015 he was signed on to direct the sequel, but then you just mentioned that Renner said, "Yeah, I don't know if I want to come back without Ricola." So it just seems like it fell apart. So I guess that probably is it, right? Like, it's just one of those things where I bet this came actually pretty close to happening multiple times, but just disagreements on how to move forward are probably what kept it. And I think those disagreements kept building up and building up. And I think this is one that fell victim to passage of time only.
Definitely.
You know, sometimes that just happens. Like this is one where I don't look at it and say, unlike other ones we've done where it's like, well, it's so clear why there wasn't a sequel. This is one where I honestly believe it could have gone either way. We could have Hansel and Gretel 2 and 3 by now, and the only thing really keeping it was they just waited too long. They just took too long trying to figure out a sequel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because there's certainly been other movies like this that, you know, in America, we don't really think of them as hits, but they did well enough internationally to keep kind of chugging along. I mean, heck, I love the Resident Evil franchise with Mila Jovovich, and those are like a good example where international gross has really helped that become a 6-film series. You know, so sometimes you can get away with that. This one just, they didn't strike when the iron was hot, unfortunately. Well, maybe not unfortunately, because I don't need to see any more of these.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, you wouldn't have wanted a sequel?
No, I mean, having seen this now, would I give a second one a chance? You know, what's rolling around my brain right now is the fact that I didn't really like Dead Snow, but I liked Dead Snow 2 a lot. You know, so by the law of like Ricola averages, maybe the second one would be much better.
Yeah.
And I, you know, like I said, this isn't a movie I hated. This has been an interesting conversation because I think I was much more negative recording it than I feel like I was when I sat down to do this recording, or certainly when I was watching it. So I guess I probably would watch a sequel, but I don't feel like I need one or want one. But if they made it, yeah, I guess I'd check it out. Just out of maybe pure curiosity would get me.
And again, the circumstances, like I would absolutely have cracked a few beers watching the sequel, you know, and I probably wouldn't have watched it like alone. I would have watched maybe with like some buddies, you know. It seems like one of those types of movies that it does seem like a film festival. I don't want to say midnight movie because not really, but you get where I'm coming from when I say that.
No, yeah, well, I think we both wish it felt more like a midnight movie.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Chris, I can't let us wrap up without hitting on just a few more things here, because you know me, I like to make sure I kind of cross off all my notes, and I'm thorough if nothing else. That's what everyone says about me. So let me hit on a couple last things here as we wrap up our Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters discussion. So first of all, speaking of Hollywood sexism, we should mention that I believe in this movie Hansel and Gretel are, if not twins, they're supposed to be very close in age, but Jeremy Renner is 15 years older than Gemma Arterton. I guess they couldn't find an actress who was age appropriate. That's the way Hollywood rolls, you know?
Yep.
I don't know if you took note of this, Chris, but there's a character we didn't talk about. And it's not like he's super important. It's not like he's very memorable, and I can see why we didn't talk about him. But there's another character named Ben. Ben is a teenage kid who lives in a village. Yeah, he's like a big fan of Hansel Gretel. He wants to be a witch hunter, right? He ends up becoming kind of a sidekick of theirs. Yeah. I bring him up because he's played by Thomas Mann. Thomas Mann, not necessarily a household name, but there is a sequence near the end of the movie where he is being held hostage by one of the witches, and Hansel shoots through his shoulder to hit the witch behind him. Right? That's the kind of the joke of the moment. Mm-hmm. Now, why this is significant is Thomas Mann goes on to play young Deputy Hawkins in Halloween Kills, the young version of Will Patton's character who has to shoot his fellow cop through the shoulder to hit Michael Myers. He learned his lesson in Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunter. So
I cannot believe that you got to that spot. Wow, that is some deep cuts.
Hey, Chris.
Holy shit!
Evil dies tonight. All right, that's all I'm saying.
Evil dies tonight!
Evil dies tonight!
Oh, we need to find T-shirts of that, right?
Oh, we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Two last things. Both Wikipedia centric. On Wikipedia for this movie, the Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters entry, I thought it was interesting that the See Also section at the bottom, I'm gonna read you these. See Also, The Brothers Grimm, List of 3D films, List of 4DX motion enhanced films, List of films shot in digital, and List of films featuring diabetes.
Diabetes.
So... and speaking of the Wikipedia page, you know, you and I had mentioned before we started recording that the Wikipedia entry for this movie is surprisingly vast and detailed.
Extremely.
Much more so than you see for more successful, more beloved films. And where I specifically took note of that is one of the last chapters or sections of the Wikipedia page is called Cult Status. And it is a paragraph devoted to speaking about how this movie has apparently gone on to have a huge cult status, which I would say is not true. But this definitely feels like this Wikipedia page is written by someone who just loves this movie.
Tommy Wirkola.
And is like, and is like, well, I'm just going to write stuff that no one else is going to come in and edit. Because I want to read you the last sentence of this section, Chris. It says,
Sure.
While Renner's box office draw and the film's well-articulated premise have been listed as major factors behind its theatrical success, its ability to maintain a lasting fan following has also been attributed to its original concept, excellent gore and action sequences, Renner and Arterton's tongue-in-cheek performances, and the film's ability to not take itself too seriously.
Yeah.
Sure, Wikipedia.
Yeah, there was no way to fact check that one. That's for sure. Well, that'll about do it for Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters from 2013. And in the spirit of giving, as I gifted you this whatever this during Christmas time, Trev, you actually gave me something, and that movie is
1995's Tank Girl, directed by Rachel Talalay, based on the comic book of the same name by Jamie Hewlett, and starring Lori Petty, and also Naomi Watts, Ice-T, Malcolm McDowell, all-star cast.
Oh wow.
Crazy, bizarre cult comic book film from the 90s. Been years since I've seen it. I've been like itching to rewatch it. I know you've never seen it and we're thinking about it, and I'm glad you waited. I'm very, very excited. I just think this is like a wild one. I don't know that you're going to like it. I can't say that.
Sure.
But I definitely think this movie is so strange. We're definitely going to have a lot to talk about with it.
Cool. Okay, well, I'm very excited for it, and you should be too, listeners. So if you want to follow along with Failure to Franchise with Trev and Chris-tmas, never going to let that go. At F2F Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. That's at F2, the number 2F Pod. All the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. Star rating would be awesome. As well, just honestly join the tribe, hit the subscribe, and follow along with us, and more really good discussions like this one. I'm very, very happy with this discussion. I liked where it went. We got a little dramatic at times. We got a little factual. We had some silliness, and this one was a good one. I enjoyed this one.
If only you could say all that about the movie Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.
Quick thing, Trev. You mentioned on that Wikipedia page other movies with diabetes.
Yeah.
Can you go ahead and click that link, please?
Oh yeah, give me 1 second here.
I'm very, very curious.
Okay.
What's there?
List of films featuring diabetes. Oh man, Chris, I'm not gonna lie. This is a lengthy list. You want? Maybe I should just give some highlights here.
Sure.
You know what's nice is it tells you the movie and it tells you who has diabetes in it.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. So you have, for instance,
inclusive.
2000's Chocolat. An elderly woman in the film hides her diabetes from her family. 2006's Click. The protagonist's father has diabetes. 1993's Cliffhanger. The female pilot of the criminal gang radios for emergency backup, saying that they need insulin for a person with diabetes. Hey, that's a lie, though. Oh, well, whatever. 1997's Con Air. Yes, the film's protagonist helps a fellow convict who has diabetes. Dude, this list is long, man. There's a lot of movies on it. Paul Blart Mall Cop and Paul Blart Mall Cop 2.
Well, that's obvious.
Paul Blart has my diabetes. I didn't realize that. Oh, yeah, Panic Room. Kristen Stewart has diabetes in that. One of the multiple personalities played by James McAvoy in Split has diabetes. 2004's Scarecrow Gone Wild. A college-aged man suffers a diabetic shock as a result of a prank, but is resurrected as a killer scarecrow. Oh, hold on, Chris. I can't not mention this one. I know you have something to say, but 1998's Half-Baked. The stoner comedy features a horse with diabetes.
Now, if we can only gather all these characters, including the horse, for a diabetes cinematic universe,
yes.
that would break this podcast.
The Diabetes Avengers. It's a real shame, though, is we waited too long, and unfortunately we lost Wilford Brimley, who, of course, would have been the Nick Fury of that group.
Yeah.
Diabetes.
Diabetes, 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 diabetes.
Thank you, Wilford. Diabetes, diabetes, diabetes,
Diabetes, diabetes, diabetes, diabetes, diabetes,
diabetes, diabetes, diabetes, diabetes, diabetes,
diabetes, diabetes, diabetes,
Diabetes.
diabetes, 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 diabetes,
diabetes, diabetes, diabetes,
diabetes, diabetes,
Diabetes. Diabetes.
diabetes, diabetes.
diabetes, diabetes, diabetes.
So, you got diabetes.